I'm excited that you're all here. And what I'd love to do without anything further is I just want to first off start by having our guests of honor introduce themselves. And let's do this. Deb, let's have you highlight you. Go first. Spotlight for everybody. You're on, Deb. Go ahead.
All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Deb Zellers. I'm the volleyball coach at DePauw University, an NCAA Division III school in Greencastle, Indiana. And this is year 31 for me coaching at DePauw. I'm also a DePauw grad, so just a little bit about me.
All right. All right. Just a reminder to mute. All right. So let's do this. Katie, let me spotlight you. Go ahead and I didn't this is see, here we go. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Katie. I'm a senior, so this is year 4 for me at DePauw on the volleyball team with Coach Deb. I first met Tree in my freshman year, and that's kind of what we'll start to talk about. But yeah, I'm from Cincinnati. I'm a biochemistry major. Love volleyball.
Katie, do you know what we're doing? What are your plans after DePauw?
So I'm planning on taking a gap year to work in some patient care related job, and then after that apply to PA schools. So
love it. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it so much. Okay. So we're going to start here. This is going to be a really, when I say this is a free flowing conversation, it really is. Deb and Katie and I had, it's kind of too late, thought of, hey, we should do a presentation at the AVCA. Deb and I had kind of dreamt about it a little bit, and it just didn't work out, mostly because you can see I'm just sort of doing all the things, and it's fault of the AVCAs. Mm-hmm. If you are here, just make sure you're muted. Okay. So I'll just start here. I had the privilege of being able to work with DePauw University's volleyball program, and Deb and Katie and her teammates. You said you were freshmen, so this has clearly been, what year would that have been? 2021?
Yes.
2021. And I'll just set the stage and then I'm going to let Deb take it away. I was hired to consult with Deb and one other team at DePauw, just to sort of consult with them with their culture. And Deb, if you want to go ahead and share anything you want to share about that, I am willing to I'm going to just step out of the way and let you go.
Okay, so it might be helpful for me to tell you my why. My why in doing this is because I was in a really rough place from a coaching standpoint in terms of things like my self-confidence, feeling like I was putting in a lot of work and not getting the results I was looking into getting. And so I wanted to do this because I'm sure there are a lot of coaches out there that could be in a volume place that are struggling in different ways. And I went through it, and I want to help anyone else who might be in that place, or even if you're in a good place, but you want to keep it in that great place. So just to frame this a little bit, pre-pandemic time, our program was in a fairly successful place. We were in the NCAA tournament 6 out of 7 years. And we were really proud of that accomplishment because we had been a good program, but we had really taken a step forward to becoming more of a national program. So we had a decent amount of success, and sometimes winning can kind of cloud maybe some things that are happening in the background. Maybe it makes it easier to get through some of those things that are happening in the background. But for me as a coach, I could now I can really easily see that there were some things going awry within our culture. Some of those things were just little seeds that were planted, but I knew and I could see that I needed to really address some things with our culture. At the same time, like a lot of these things seemed small. They seemed, like I said, like they were in the background, maybe conversations in a locker room or meetings happening after meetings that players were having, but I also started to see that I wasn't completely having my team's, what I would call my team's eyes. Um, you know, as a coach, when you're coaching and your team is invested and they're looking at you and they're buying in, and you know, certainly when they're not. And I would have opportunities in the gym when I was speaking, and I would see, you know, two other players talking at the same time that I was talking, or they would go to the drinking fountain and I could see that they were talking, whispering about something. Maybe they were off the court waiting to come in, and I would see whispers happening. So it's just these little seeds that now looking back on it, I know that were sort of an erosion of our culture at the time. And those things were perpetuating themselves year after year, and they were starting to become bigger. Um, they became bigger for us when the pandemic hit. We graduated a couple of All Americans. We lost a couple of good players for just random reasons. It wasn't typical. And then I was caught also in a cycle of having a different assistant coach every year or every other year because our assistant coach position was part time. So having to put a lot of energy into that. And then it culminated Katie's freshman year when I did not have an assistant at all. So I was the only coach trying to do everything, trying to do it at a level that, you know, we had been doing it in the national tournament. And that's when things really took a hard nosedive for me. As part of this, we also would evaluate our players at the end of the year. Um, our athletic department does anonymous player evaluations. And through these years, I was starting to get more and more negativity in these player evaluations that were coming back that would go to my athletic director, who I had and have a lot of respect for. But it was very difficult because maybe there wouldn't be examples with something that was written. Uh, my integrity was starting to be called into question. Uh, some of the things that were written, these are even hard things for me to say right now, but my coach makes me hate the game of volleyball. Um, I had two players write that I abused them. I had players write that I'm too old to coach any longer. You know, things that were really hurtful, I was reading. And that was really just the tip of the iceberg. There was everything else from, you know, being angry about where we were eating, for example, on team road trips, to I wasn't showing value in them as people. And it was a very, very hard place for me to be because I felt like I was experiencing a lot of trauma in terms of what was written, attacking me personally, but I didn't even know who it was coming from. I didn't know what situation it was coming from. I didn't know how to address those things because I didn't want to address these things in big team meetings. It didn't seem right. And at the same time, I had to sit in front of my athletic director and account for these things, which was also very difficult because either A, I stood up for myself and tried to explain why these things were happening. But by doing so, sometimes I was told that I didn't have a growth mindset or I was making excuses for certain situations. Or B, I could sit there and not say anything. And it was almost as if I was accepting that I had done these things. And for me, it was just a very difficult place to be. I think at the end of the day, we want to feel like we're our authentic selves. And I couldn't understand why my family, my friends, my coworkers, the opponents across the net all saw me as the same person that I saw in myself. But ultimately, it felt like my team was seeing me as a different person. And just through all of that, I started to build a lot of armor around myself, as Tree was able to show me when she started working with me at DePauw. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells because I felt like I needed to be perfect in front of my team. So because I needed to be perfect, I wasn't going to show any weakness. I didn't want to have my kids around my team because I didn't want it to be seen that I was weak because I was a mom, for example. Um, if I had a mistake in my scouting report, a number was off, a name was misspelled, it felt like that was held against me. Someone would bring that up and make fun of me even for that happening. And so, again, like, this is really nothing to do with this as placing blame. It's not trying to say that everything I did was great. There are certainly things that I've learned to do my job better, but I'm the same person today that I was then. It's just that our culture is now better. And so my team sees me in a completely different light today than 4 years ago when Katie was a freshman. And it's come with a lot of work for our players, for myself, but I'm so thankful that we put in the work and where our culture has come over these 4 years.
Gosh, I just, first of all, I just have to say thank you. That is not a small thing to do. And you have so much of my respect and admiration for being willing to do this, but also like kind of wanting to, like, this, you're driving this because I think that you know the impact that it will have. And there's so much that you just said that we can unpack. And what I think it might be fun to do is sort of start here and just let me bring Katie in and add her. And I will say, when we first started talking, I remember vividly talking with you in advance of me coming there, right? I remember just being in a place where we were talking about these things and you were telling me what you were doing. And I was kind of like, we were working through stuff. We kind of just started working through my workbook, right? And you were on it. Like, you were like, I'm on it. And I remember thinking, you're doing many of the right things. Like you said, like, you're not different today than you were day one. And I remember thinking, wow, it just sort of feels like there's something in the way, right? There's some sort of a boulder. And so I hadn't seen the team yet. I hadn't been with the team yet. And I said, okay, well, let me come there. And we had an in-person visit as a part of this package. And I came to be with the team. And so I will get into that moment where I think that we were able to kind of lift some of the debris out of the way. But Katie, I want to bring you in and I just want to hear from your point of view. Now, you were a freshman, so you were new, but certainly you were in some of the rooms away from coach, because here's what I'll say, because other people on this call, I promise you, are here. I remember specifically you saying, I would have these conversations with this player and everything would go good. And then they would go back, they would go away from me. And it was like 10 steps backwards. Like, we had a good interaction one-on-one, but then they would go back to the team and not so much. And it just seemed like I wasn't making any progress. And that is something I have heard since a lot. That happens a lot, more than you can imagine. So Katie, will you tell us what it felt like to be on the team when you first came into it, and what, just from a cultural standpoint, we're not trying to throw anybody under the bus. We're really just talking about the energy. At the end of the day, culture is just the energy that exists amongst a group of people over time. So can you describe what that was like from your seat?
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting that you introduced it that way too, because I was gonna say that like anything that I'm saying is not against my teammates, because the people that were on the team, I also agree that we had some great people on the team my freshman year, and I'm sure that everyone had their own struggles, and we had a lot of them, but like I know that I fell into some of the patterns that Coach Deb is talking about when I was a freshman, because that's what I was walking into. So I think that that would be one of the biggest things I'd say, is that like coming in as a freshman, you learn from all of your other teammates. So if you come into a locker room where we're talking bad about coach, you feel as if you need to, or you're not going to fit in.
Yep.
And so that's where like Coach and I have talked about this in the past. That's where I felt like I was in this tough situation because I'm getting playing time as a freshman over some people that really want playing time. And I want to fit in on the team and I want to feel included, but I also want coach to like me. And I also don't want to talk bad about coach because I feel like that's a bad thing to do. So like, what do I do? And they're like being in that position was really hard for me because I don't want to ruin my character to fit in, but I really want to fit in. And I think as a freshman, across all colleges, across all divisions, there's that need and that want to fit in like your classes, especially on your team, and especially when we're coming in the fall season, and those are the first people we meet. So I think one of the biggest issues is that like nobody was talking about the problems that we had on the team. So like we'd come into practice and there'd be the snickering on the sidelines, but everyone would do it because everyone's doing it. And then we'd leave a conversation with coach and then people would go to the locker room and start talking poorly. And nobody stops it because you don't want to be the one person that's not. And it was to a point where that was beating down on my character because I was like, I'm not doing something about this and this isn't right. But it was also just like it put me in a place where I was like, I don't think I can do this for 4 years. Because no, I'm not enjoying my sport anymore. And it's not because of coach, but it's because my teammates aren't making me feel, like loved and supported and wanted. Um, and again, I want to repeat that it's not that these people didn't necessarily care about me. And I wouldn't say I was best friends with everyone on the team. And I don't think in all four of my years on the team that everyone was my friend. But there's a difference between everyone, like having a relationship with every single person on the team and being friends with them. And I think that there's a difference between that. And we kind of discussed that throughout this journey. One of the biggest steps was making sure that we built relationships with everyone on the team. So I don't want to take yet.
It's so interesting to hear your perspective, Katie. Gosh, it's so I just for the room, let me just say this. And this is something that I talk about in my work a lot. In a little while, if we have time, I'll share the culture model in case you're not familiar with it, but it's a plug, right? And it's an electrical plug because we're trying to plug into the energy of the room. And what Katie just unpacked there, what she just talked about is the human desire at any age to belong, right? And she used the word fit in, which I thought was so interesting because you did find yourself fitting in a little bit. And I say, what I mean by that is I often make the distinction we use, and I'm taking this from Dr. Brene Brown, but we use those terms interchangeably, fitting in and belonging. And what you described is that pull to fit in, but it was taking you away from being your true self. And so there can't be belonging. Like fitting in gets in the way of belonging, but there's, like you said, there's such a human desire to make sure that we're safe, especially as a freshman, especially in a fall sport. But I think it's true, of all things, when you're going to a new environment. You came from Cincinnati, you're going to, Indiana. How many hours away? 5, 4?
It's like 2.5, but it is the middle of nowhere, Indiana.
So it feels like 5. Okay. I knew that. Okay. And so I think what you like, and I've said this to coaches all the time, if you're not accounting for belonging, you're putting your players in a really precarious position because as a generation, first of all, let me make this distinction. As a society, we are all more lonely. We are in the middle of a loneliness pandemic. For sure. In our country, just the way that we're pretty individualistic society right now. And that loneliness is a thing. As a generation, the data supports me saying that they are the loneliest generation by a lot, right? And there's a lot of factors that go into that. And so if you can account for belonging, healthy belonging, not unhealthy fitting in, you don't have to worry so much about the transfer portal. Now, you're not going to make up for somebody making $200K a year, but you're going to make up for a lot if you can provide true healthy belonging. And you just kind of ended with that, Katie. So let me ask you this. It wasn't an immediate change. Would you agree? Okay. Let's go back, if you can remember, to the first meeting that I had with you all in person. And by the way, I only met with this team in person twice. Is that right? We had some Zoom stuff with the team, not many, but it was mostly, Deb and I and Sid, your assistant. Oh, no, unmute. I'm sorry. I just accidentally muted you. I didn't mean it. I'm just trying to make sure that nobody's unmuted. Does anything stand out for you from that first visit where it was just me and maybe 8 or 9 of you? It wasn't because it was a spring roster. It didn't feel like there was a lot there. There was even some people like studying abroad, I think. So is there anything that stood out from that meeting, or how did the follow-up to that meeting go? Because there's a moment I want to bring up from that meeting that stuck out to me.
Okay, this was a while ago, so I'm gonna try to remember.
No
to the
worries.
best of my ability. But I do remember going into the meeting like reluctant to do it because
Interesting.
I was like, I'm not saying this to be mean, but I was like, who's this woman? Like, how's she gonna help us? Like, we can solve our own problems, kind of that sort of mentality. And I was like, I was also in the place where I was like, well, I know that maybe this teammate would be on board, but like, I don't know about this teammate and this teammate and this teammate. So like, what's the point? So like, we all weren't on the same page. I definitely remember that. So kind of back to what coach was saying, like, I almost felt like hopeless in a sense where I was just like, why are we doing this? Why am I dedicating my time to this? Because is anything really going to change?
Wow.
And I would also even comment that like we didn't see the biggest changes until 2023. Into like that spring season and that fall season. And I think that was because it took that long for everyone to get on board. One of our mottos I'm pretty sure it was on one of our t-shirts last year, it said 2 feet in, on the back. And what we mean by that is like not having 1 foot in the door for the team and like, okay, I'll do this, and this, but not this part of our commitment. It's having both feet in and being fully committed 24/7. By 2023, I have no doubt that we got there, but
That's amazing. And I remember there was a point in that meeting, and I love that you said that because it's something that I try to like sort of highlight for everybody involved. Like, this is not a fast change. If you're doing culture right, it's never done. That's number one. And this is the long game. This is not a quick thing. If you get quick results, it's probably superficial. It's like there's a habitude called crock pots and microwaves. And if you just think about it, like what kind of meal, what meal tastes better, coming out of your crock pot or a microwave, right? And this is culture is totally a crock pot kind of meal. And if it is a microwave meal, it's very short lived, right? And so thank you for making that point. I remember, and I think that there was, for me, I had hope because I had been in these kinds of situations before, but it was the first time that I think that I noticed this coach making real effort and truly doing things the right way. And it almost felt, and I talk about the culture model, the core is habits, because we have habits, our brains and our group brain is set up to automate processes, if you will. And I felt like there was a habit amongst the culture to just not want to get behind what your coach was saying. And I remember there was a moment in the meeting where I was hearing you out. I kind of let y'all air it. And I work really hard to be non-judgmental, and I'm not trying to be the coach's proxy in these situations. I'm just trying to get it right. I'm not ever trying to be right. I'm never trying to have the answers. And I think this is really helpful for coaches like all of us. But I remember just hearing y'all out for a little while and stopping and saying, and maybe you remember after I say it, I just stopped and I asked the room, like, it kind of feels or sort of seems like y'all are just in the habit of not liking your coach. And that what you just did with your head nod, that was kind of you kind of like everybody sort of looked at each other and they were like, now that you say it like that, yeah, that was sort of what was happening. And that when I say there's a boulder in the river, that's kind of what it was. And Deb, let's have you come back in a little bit. We talked about it afterwards and it was hard. Like, this is my least favorite part of my job. That conversation didn't, I mean, it was hard. I don't want to ever tell, I'm never letting a team like just bash their coach, but sometimes when stuff comes out, it's hard to have those conversations and there's a lot of emotion. This is, you put your heart and soul into this. And I remember sort of saying that to you and we sort of worked back and we kind of have a thought, at least at the time, that that habit may have started 8 or 9 years earlier. Would you agree? And so think about this, y'all. Everybody on the call, think about this. Everybody on that roster inherited that habit. That's how strong team culture is. No one was there for the origination of why that, and that boulder just kept gathering, like it just kept growing in size as it wasn't like necessarily removed. And so, yeah, Deb, you want to say more about that? Because I think that that was, it wasn't an immediate fix, but it was a turning point, I think, for sure.
Yeah, it was huge. I don't think our culture would be here where it is today, Tree, without you coming into things, without you. Tree was sort of the principal in the room. I had been fighting the evaluations and our culture, and I kept coming to the table to try to fix everything that I was told was wrong. So maybe one year it might be that I need to be a stronger communicator. The next year I needed to um, hold players accountable better. The next year I need to be a better listener. The next year I needed to describe roles better. Well, then the next year when I dove into being crystal clear about roles, then I was told I was playing favorites. And so every year I felt like I was trying to morph myself into a different person based on what I was being told through evaluations with my boss. And really I lost myself because I didn't know who I was anymore because I kept trying to be what everyone else needed from me or I thought needed from me. But the problem was I kept coming to a wall, and like I said, the individual conversations would be great, but then all of a sudden it wouldn't be great because things were continuing on negatively in the background. And so ultimately, it really wasn't about what I was doing right or wrong. It was the fact that we didn't have trust and we weren't trusting one another, player to player, coach to player, all of it. And Tree, I distinctly remember my first meeting with you, which came right before your meeting with our team. And I remember Tree talking to me, and she's very direct. I really like that. She's very honest, very direct. She doesn't mince words. She's in charge. She's the principal in the room. And she said to me, you know, if you don't fix this, you may not have a job. And that it doesn't get much more serious than that, you know, and that's a hard reality to hear. And even though like I was frustrated with these things happening in the background, I was still the one in charge of fixing it. But that's where it was so hard because how do you fix something that you're sort of the scapegoat? You know, you're the one everybody's pointing the finger at, and then I was the one who had to fix it. And I kept trying and trying and trying. And that's where, for me, I think things started to get dark. I became hopeless because I was working my tail off, even when things weren't going well. I was trying a ton of different things, but they weren't working. I wasn't getting through to our team. And, you know, as anyone who coaches knows how much time you put into this profession, and you don't want to know what you make in an hourly salary. and you know, it's a giving profession, and most coaches are doing it because they want something great for their student athletes. And I was seeing that my why, which is having a great experience for my student athletes and having them make the lifelong friendships, having them grow within a program that's got a good culture, Whether that growth is confidence, whether that growth is leadership, whether it's perspective, that's my why. That's what I want for my team. I want them to love playing the game. But I was hearing in my evaluations, coach makes me hate this game. I want to be a great mentor, but I was hearing in my evaluations that I was being abusive, which is so wrong. I was told that I was old and outdated, but yet I was working my tail off to be great. And we had just come off of being in the national tournament multiple years. And so all these things for me were just colliding. And so I really needed an outside person. I needed Tree to come in and be the principal in the room, not to tell me I was doing everything right. And she didn't. She challenged me on a lot of things, which I ultimately it grew trust because she was honest. But I also knew I was doing a lot of things intentionally to be helpful, to try to get through this. And I was being put in a very unfair situation at some level. And we needed someone to challenge the team and challenge myself so that we could take the steps that we needed to fix this. And to your question about how long it took, that was Katie's freshman year. Katie's sophomore year was really a transition year for us. We put all the pieces in, we were working very hard at it, but we still had this really difficult pull of those that had been part of the past. And there was a lot of individual conversations, a lot of pushback to us as coaches. We had to really stand up and be strong in terms of accountability, in terms of staying on top of not only shutting down the conversations at the off the side of the court or when they were getting water, but also even more importantly, catching our team doing things well. And I remember Tree telling me in our off season that particular year that we have to, actually it was 3/4 the way through our fall season. She was saying, you have to have 10 times more positives to your team for every one thing that, that you're catching them doing wrong. And I remembered hearing that and looking at her and being like, what if we're not doing 10 things great? Like I can't just make things up. Like this is hard. This is the struggle.
I remember this meeting. I remember this
find
meeting.
all these things, right? And so, but so that year, that sophomore year was really a transition year. And there was some behaviors, especially by some upperclassmen that weren't dying easy. But we stayed with it and we held accountable. And I remember specifically, Katie, your freshman year that spring and then into the fall, I remember telling you, like, find 3 people who are like-minded with you. You're telling me all these great things and you feel like you're on an island by yourself. Find someone else, find a couple people and make that your circle. And then once you start aligning on the good side of things, and positive side of wanting better things for our program, then pull someone else in who's on the fence, then pull someone else. And then ultimately what happened is the voice in the room became those who wanted something positive. And that started to drown out the voice in the room that was pulling people down or bullying people in the background or talking crap about coaches or whatever. And when the script was flipped, it started to turn. And that was your sophomore year.
Well, let me jump in here. So I get a text from you on August 27th. And I'm gonna fast forward into the you were coming into your season. We're now out of preseason and open the season up this weekend. And you say, the funny thing about culture, though, to your point that you just made, when it's not good, it steamrolls and gets passed along. And amazingly, when it's good, it also can get passed along. And then you go on to say some other, really cool things. And to see the joy that you would just text me here and there, like, and especially in this past season and the season prior. And so Katie, why don't you share a little bit? Like, let's get to 23 now. And you ended what you said last time with, like, when we decided to truly, kind of invest in those relationships, that was the game changer. That's what really did the work. It's nothing. Yeah, I removed the boulder and, we worked together a lot. But from a player standpoint, y'all had to do the hard work of truly building relationships with one another and that's not how it always works. So just, can you talk about your experience and kind of to what coach just said and just kind of walk us into up to your senior year?
Yeah, I think one of the things that coach said most to us, or like the team when I was in my sophomore to junior year, was build the relationships. So we always talked about like go on a coffee date, or like text someone new this week. I think we as a team kind of like did a few things where like you'd get a new person to be in contact with, whatever. Over the summer we had mentor groups, which would be like four of us, kind of talking about topics that coaches gave us, but it was nice because the people that, like wanted the culture to change were super invested in it. So we tried to build the relationship with other players before they got on campus. So that was nice. But I would say one of the other big things that really helped us shift was um, we had the opportunity, like under NCAA rules, to have 12 leadership meetings, I think, prior to spring season practices. I think I'm getting that right. So we used
Or there's going to be a violation at DePauw pretty soon. No, I'm just kidding.
uh-oh, for 2022. But hey, so we had all 12 of those meetings, and I know I showed up to every single one I could, but they were optional. And what was kind of evident was seeing who actually showed up because they were optional. So you could see, who is really investing in this and trying to buy their time into it. And during one of
Can
those
I jump
meetings,
in? Was
yes.
there anybody saying in the background when before the culture had completely flipped? Was there anybody like jabbing at those people that were going, or was there any dissuading of that happening? Can you talk a little bit about like the inertia that you had to fight to go to those?
Yeah, I would say that it was very under the radar. And this was kind of at a point where I think some of us had changed our minds about like the culture. We're like, this is like not fun. Like we're not gaining what we could gain from being on this team. Um, a lot of us really cared about coach, and we could see how this was affecting her. So I think that it was nice to kind of be able to be part of like that group that, wanted something more for the team. But especially being on a campus where we're divided into sororities and every single person on our team is in a sorority and was at this point as well. I think it was very easy to be pulled into those groups, and as much as we talked about not doing that, it still happened. Um, so I think that also became an issue when like there was a majority from one house going, and then some people
Interesting.
from another house weren't. So that was definitely a cause. Um, but what I was gonna say is one of the big things we did was make a list of our standards of behavior. And this, I would say, was like a vital point for us in the whole process of changing the culture, because this took the responsibility off of coach and onto us. But then I'd like to like bring up the relationships again, because the relationships are the only way that would make our standards of behavior possible. Because what I mean by this is that if I don't have a relationship with my teammate Lauren, and I go up and tell her, "Hey, you shouldn't be drinking the night before a game," then she's just gonna say something mean to me and be like, like get away from me. But if we have the level of trust where I can go up to her before she starts drinking and be like, it's probably not the best idea, like your teammates are not going to be happy, and like I trust you enough to be able to come up to you and have this conversation, then she'll be like, you know what, like I appreciate you being willing to say that to me, and I'm gonna hop on board. So that was like more of an extreme scenario with drinking, but we were at that place. And yeah, I think that that was a game changer because we built up these relationships over summer. And then we come into the 2023 season and we're like, let's get to work. Like we've worked so hard for this. We ended up going undefeated in our conference run, which hadn't happened in a long time. And it was enjoyable too. But it was also because people were showing up to practice in the same color shirts for once because like you cared. Yeah.
Okay, I'm laughing so hard because this is for everybody. The amount of times that I've had intense and long conversations around laundry with college teams it's too many to count. And it seems like the most ridiculous thing, but you actually just summed it up in a better way than I've ever summed it up. Like, because we cared, we showed up in the right shirt. We made sure our laundry was on the right, laundry loop or whatever. Oh my goodness. That is amazing. Can I do this real quick? And I just want to share, this is for everybody, because I think you did so much there to sort of kind of make it just bring to life why this is the way that it is. So Deb, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And it has the model on it.
Yes.
Okay, great. So Katie, I mean, I'm just saying, you just nailed this like perfectly. So this is the model. If you haven't seen it, and just a real quick breakdown, like the hot prong is connection between the people. The connection from those people to the purpose, mission, and vision is the neutral prong. Don't be confused by the name. Still pretty important, right? You have to have both. Otherwise, it's like you could have a good connection with the players, but if you're not connected to what you're all trying to do together or aren't clear on what you're all trying to do together, you could just be a good sewing circle, right? And while this is not meant to be linear, if I had to pick, I would always start with the hot prong. And so that's the relationships, right? Because the grounding prong, the thing that grounds you is the standards of behavior. And so you just talked about that, Katie, but like so often I think teams do this wrong where they work first from standards of behavior. And like you just laid out so perfectly, if you don't have a fired up hot prong and you're not that hot prong and all of those people aren't like motivated to do this thing together, then this becomes fear and power over. That's how you get the standards of behavior to be like high. And you don't have to try so hard. If these are firing good, the players, as you just described, get to encourage each other and in their own way, make their own decisions with their own agency because of the connection they feel to each other and to your common goal or your common purpose, right? And then it's all surrounded with the feedback loop and then the habits, as we've already kind of touched on. So that's where, again, all of it's important. I just think so often we start with standards of behavior first, and then we end up kind of tainting, like tarnishing these two prongs. And if you're always worried about this one, all of the rest of it becomes a heck of a lot easier. So I just wanted to pause and sort of lay out and kind of tie what Katie just said back to the model and in a way that maybe feels actionable for people. And then I want to kind of turn it back to Deb. Do you have some follow-up there? Because wow, Katie, first of all, thank you. That was amazing.
Well, my follow-up, if you think it's the right timing, Tree, would be some of the things that we specifically did to turn culture.
I would love that. Yeah.
And so the relationship building, starting there, definitely. But more specifically with that, we had a lack of trust in our program. So Tree brought to our program this brainchild of Brene Brown called Braving, Dr. Brene Brown. And I'm not going to go into all the specifics of Braving, but basically what it is Braving is an acronym that stands for the principles of trust. And this was hugely impactful in our program. We talk about this all the time as a team. Our players tell me that they're using this in other aspects of their life, in their sororities, in their relationships. It was very impactful because we could take this system or this idea and we could agree upon it as a team because it made sense. For example, B is for boundaries. So we all understood that if we wanted to set a boundary, we had to communicate those boundaries. So as an example to that, I would tell my team, you can, if it's an emergency, you can always call me. But if you're sending me a text or you need information, my boundary is that nothing after 11 o'clock at night. I go to bed at midnight. I need 11 to 12 to disconnect from everything. So that was a personal boundary that I made from a communication standpoint with my team. But this braving, what it did for me personally as a coach is we agreed to all of these things to build trust. I could call out behaviors that we were doing great within braving. So I could say, Katie, you're so reliable because you show up every time you say you're going to show up and you're on time. And because you're so reliable, and that's the R in braving, your teammates have trust in you. Your coaches have trust in you. And I could say to Katie, if, we all make mistakes, but if you make a mistake that you take accountability, that's the A in braving. And because of that, your teammates trust you. And so that was great. But on the flip side of that, if someone were showing up late, I could say to them, you're so great with your teammates. You never judge them. And that builds your trust as a team and for you. But right now you're showing up late. And so that's a situation where we can't count on you in that moment. I needed you to do this and you weren't here to do that. And that's breaking down our trust. So for me as a coach who didn't like conflict situations, didn't have a lot of great results from them, it ended up in my past coming back to me negatively, especially in the background in those conversations. I now had a pathway to compliment players and help them build trust in our program. And I also had a pathway to hold them accountable. And it wasn't personal. And that's the biggest thing I would say for coaches, and maybe even more so for female coaches. A lot of times when you're trying to hold someone accountable, it becomes personal. It becomes about the relationship. And it's not about the relationship. It's just, this is what has to happen for teams to function at a very high level. And it was such a game changer for me as a coach. And I will always be indebted to Tree for bringing that into our program. And along with braving, I would say hard conversations, and this continues to be something that we're working on. Families get in arguments, and that's okay. They still love one another. But teams sometimes don't want to have those hard conversations or address conflict situations because of what Katie said earlier. Everyone wants the sense of belonging. Everyone wants to feel like they're fitting in. And it takes a lot of courage to have a hard conversation like the one Katie talked about and maybe with another teammate, Lauren. That takes a lot of courage. And you have to have trust in your program and in your people to be able to have those hard conversations. But, so I think every team that I coach will always be a work in progress because it's such a courageous and hard thing when it comes to those conversations. But one of the things that we talk about is if you're truly friends, if you're truly love one another, you want the best for one another. So you're going to have that hard conversation, and it's going to grow your relationship rather than take it away. And as we have them and get more comfortable with them, we realize that. I've realized that as a coach. I'm better today than I was 4 years ago or 10 years ago in that regard. So those would be maybe my top two things in terms of our culture and how it turned. There were certainly some other things as well.
I got to tell you that everything you're saying is just, first of all, trust is the one through line that touches every part of the culture model. It lives in the hot prong, but it touches everything. And so that's why I think Brene Brown's model is based on research. It's for me, and it's based on behavior. So that's why I kind of try to connect as many people to her work as possible. But the hard conversation piece, listen, everybody on this call, you're here because you're probably interested in either DePauw and you love these two that are presenting, or you're coaching. And the number probably by far the thing that most teams need right now, the most that I'm working with is practice at hard conversations. We practice passing, we practice shooting a ball, we practice all these things. We don't often have real practice with conflict. And so, the power of role playing is huge. But if you don't have a language to be able to talk about trust, and that's what I love about braving, you can say, go talk to your teammate or go have that conflict all day long. They're lonely. They're never going to do it. They're never going to do it. And if they do, they don't have the practice and it's not going to be very productive. So and this derails teams more than anything else that you could possibly do. So I can't say enough that's pretty huge. And I have one more thing I want to bring up, but I want to bring Katie in. Do you have anything to add there that, like, boy, this really was good too? Like this thing that we do was really impactful for us as players.
I was just gonna, you just said it actually. I was just gonna add that like having a language is so important, which you just said. And braving was the model that we had, but it just like a tangible moment I could say was I tore my ACL this past season and it was terrible and upsetting. And it was like the 6th game in the season. But prior to that, the weekend before, I had a hard conversation with the teammate because I wasn't liking the feedback that I was getting on the court after making an error. And it had happened like 3 or 4 times in a game that we had on that Friday night. And I was like, it's the first like or second weekend of the season. Like, I just want to nip it now. And it's not that big of a deal. Well, it wasn't that big of a deal. 1, because I had a relationship with this teammate. And 2, because when I talked to her using our model of braving, I assumed generosity for her and that the feedback that she was giving me was not like poorly intentioned or that she was trying to make me feel some way or didn't think I was a good player, but that's just how she reacts in a game. So I came up to her at the hotel room and I was like, "Hey, could I just talk to you for a sec?" It was like less than a minute conversation. And it wasn't that hard, even though I was making it hard in my head. Um, and that's what I've found to be the biggest thing is that these hard conversations really aren't that hard when you have the foundation of trust on the team. And I know that we've come a long way. We've come a long way. So it's not that they weren't it's not that they weren't hard. Um, but yeah, it's definitely cool to see. And I think that like both coach and you said, having the language makes it so much less personal in a good way, where it's just like, this is how we do things, this is what we stand for. And it's not that I think that you don't believe in this, but I need to talk to you about it because I'm not aligning with you.
So good. You're a stud. Like, she's a stud. That's what I'm getting out of this.
He's a stud.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh my gosh. It's so good. Listen, I first of all, I just can't thank you both enough for unpacking all of this and for being so vulnerable and so clear in how you're describing your experience. I think we could go on forever and ever. This is what I'd like to do right now. I want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time, and we've planned for this to be an hour, and I'll stay as long as you're both willing to, as long as there's questions. But I want to do this. Part of the reason that I wanted to do this is it won't be the exact same experience because, Deb, how many hours do you think we spend on calls together?
Oh gosh. 20? I don't know.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, we met pretty regularly, right?
Yeah.
And then you had a whole bunch of hard work. But what I've been trying to do is, because like you, I want to always try to broaden the impact as much as possible. But what I'd like to do right now is, again, thank you both so much. And everybody that was here, we had such a great turnout. Does anybody go, Deb? Yes.
I'm so sorry. I would be remiss if I didn't thank a few people just real quickly, if that's
Oh
okay.
God, please.
Okay. This culture change would not have happened if my athletic director hadn't, and DePauw University hadn't brought you in. So I'm very grateful that they had the trust to do that. I'm very grateful for you. And I've told you that lots of times in text messages. I had an outstanding assistant coach who came on board, my first full-time assistant
She's
in
here.
30 years. She came in just at the right time and supported me in such a big way. Family and friends that kept me going at times when things were really, really difficult. And especially the players that were in the program at the time and that have continued on. We have phenomenal student athletes, and the work that we've put in has been a lot, but it's been so joyful at the same time. And if I've got any players listening on here, I just want to say you're great human beings, and I'm so grateful for you. So, yeah, I had to get that out there. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. I didn't provide space for that earlier. No. And I'm beyond grateful to be able to do this, but also to have gotten to work with you, because it was a really rewarding experience to see and to get to see where y'all are now. That's super fun. So if you want to, if you're still here and you're hanging out, it's 5:29. I don't know how long these two have, but if y'all have questions for them, this is, I mean, this is a great opportunity to fire away. And you can ask it in the chat box. I'm monitoring that, or unmute and just jump on in.
I thank y'all so much. One of my questions was just like, so I'm going through year 3 in a new job, and there was definitely a whole lot of culture shift and even just repair from, you know, Z's coach, Z's recruited kids versus the other kids or those that I inherited, and changing some of that culture. How did you introduce this theme of like we're starting new? How do we start a new page, new slate?
Good
That's a
question.
great question. I think one of the things I would think about is, what is the common ground amongst your team? What are their whys? If you can find something common, even if it's, there's differences too, right? But if you can find something common to rally around, I think that's a good starting place. And I would say most of the time, one of the common things is their love for the game. They want to have a good experience. They want to feel a part of something. They want to feel valued. They don't want all the drama throughout the season. So if you can start with some things like that, where you can get some common ground, then that might be a launching pad.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
Katie, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just interested from a player point of view.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, another thing is that we kind of all agreed that something was wrong. So finding a way to like get everyone on the same page in that sense. And I don't think everyone's gonna be on the same page at first, but having like at least enough people recognize that like this wasn't right, this wasn't right, we shouldn't be talking like this. And even if it doesn't, like even if you're not bringing up specific examples, I think when we all agree, like we were all sitting in the room, I think at one of the leadership meetings, and we were just like, yeah, we want something to change.
Yeah.
Getting people on board, if that helps.
Gosh, that's so good. That's so good. In the other thing that comes to mind, because I see this a lot too, is there's a book. It's called "It's Your Ship," and it's about admiral in the Navy. And I love this book because I think that sometimes as coaches we get that these are our players because they recruited whatever. And volleyball is like 18 years ahead, right? Not anymore so much, but when I was still coaching, it was like a freshman were committing, and you hear that, and you still hear that in language sometimes. And what I will say to you is, it's your ship. Like, whether you brought them there or not, whether they chose you or not, you chose them because you're there. And so look at each and every one of them. The reason this guy in that book, I highly recommend the book. It's such a fantastic read and it's well written. But in 18 months, he turned the worst ship in the Pacific Fleet into the best. and he did it literally through relationships, right? He met with every single person on that boat and develop and really, and he kind of talks you through that. And it just sounds so simple, but it is hard. And so it's at the end of the day, I just always try to remind coaches, it's your ship. It doesn't matter if you brought them in or not, they're still yours. And so just try to constantly keep that at the forefront, and then obviously take the advice of these two wise women. Thank you so much for the
Thank
question.
you.
Okay, so we had a question from Neil. Neil, come on. I don't know where you are, but I'm gonna find you. Neil, love me some Neil. He said, Deb, how do you view player evaluation? I'm gonna answer this first, okay? This is the one thing that I have written that we didn't get to. And I want to be really careful. And Neil, you know how I feel about this too. The question is, how do you view player evaluations now? What's the feedback now? My evals from the fall came back, and it's what I'm consuming myself with now. I want to say clear for everybody on the call and anybody who watches this recording, I am a hardcore, strongly feel that feedback is essential to team culture. Anonymous surveys given from a coach's boss to players is a really, I've written on the subject. I can speak about it strongly for hours. I think that it's well-intentioned, things like real response and things like that. I think there has to be some sort of a pathway. Anonymous surveys scare me because at the very least, no matter what, they're always going to cause some level of mistrust, and trust is the most important thing in culture. And so I have a huge problem with anonymous surveys. That being said, we don't get to control that a lot. And so Deb and I have talked about this ad nauseum, while we were kind of going through it, what you can do if you're building culture right, and you're truly opening the door with relationships first, but just with how you accept feedback, and you're getting feedback all the time. The surveys, and I don't even know, we haven't talked about this answer, but the surveys usually kind of just automatically become a non-issue. But Deb, I'm going to open it to you. I had to say that because I'm an advocate for, please, we have to find a different way to evaluate student athlete experience. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I'll start by saying this. We recently had someone come in and talk about well-being with our staff. And just randomly through their presentation, they said, anytime that you are asking for feedback in general, whether it's player evaluations or a business asking for feedback, there's a 7-to-1 ratio of negative to positive. So let's think about that. 7-to-1, that's the average, because human nature is when we're asked for feedback, we automatically think of, okay, what's not right here?
Yep.
And yet, in our cases as coaches, we're reading 7 times more negatives than we are positives. And yet we don't know who it's coming from. And I think that that's what's really hard. And also what's hard is we are supposed to be educating our players to be able to have hard conversations in their lives, to be able to problem solve, to be able to go into their jobs and be able to talk to their bosses, to be able to handle difficult moments. And yet these evaluations are set up in a way that none of those things are happening in terms of the growth of our student athletes. I think athletic directors are in a really hard spot. And I want to say that too, because their worst nightmare is that something's happening in a program and they don't know about it. And if something blows up in a program, then ultimately, yeah, that comes back to the coach, but it's also coming back to the AD. So I think that it's their defense mechanism. I think they genuinely want to use them as growth opportunities for coaches. And certainly there's been some of that for me, but there's been a whole lot of pain and trauma and frustration that I don't know where this random comment has come from. I have no context of it. I can't talk to someone. I can't better myself if I can't do those things. So for me, I give my own feedback form to my team. It's a little different. It's very specific to volleyball and our culture and relationships. And I ask them to put their name on it. So I am getting the feedback that I'm wanting through that. And then also the evaluations are happening because that's not under my control. And so while I don't like it, it's just part of what I have to do right now.
Have you noticed a change?
In the evaluations?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
This year, and I didn't get to read them this year because we're doing things a little differently, which is also weird, but that's okay. It all brings a lot of anxiety to me. No matter how we do it,
Right.
I have high anxiety. It brings me back to 4 years ago, to be honest. But probably one of the biggest topics was food on my evaluations. And while that's kind of funny, but also frustrating, it's also great because if that's the biggest thing that's not going right, that's a victory.
Cool.
So yeah, because
Ah,
one of the things that was brought up is we ate somewhere and we had some players get sick, and I don't think I realized it. And that was in Ohio. And then we ate at that same place in California, and everybody was mad about it, but I didn't know that. And I'm like, well, maybe it was just that restaurant in Ohio, not the one in California. So
Katie,
it's
you got to
silly.
tell it.
I don't even know about this.
Oh,
Oh, it was just a
amazing.
But that's
sandwich
our
place.
biggest issue.
I
That's
mean,
fine.
right. Exactly. Exactly. Oh, this is good. All right. Another question. And I want to say this, just because of Z's comment there. I am certain, and I don't want to speak for you, Deb, but I am certain that you will take any, and we'll make sure that people will get your email address. I am certain you're happy to connect with anybody and share your stories.
absolutely.
That,
That's why I'm doing
okay.
this. I want to help
Yeah,
others.
that's what I figured. So we'll make sure you all get Deb's contact, and of course you'll get mine and all that good stuff. So we'll do this one more question, and then we'll kind of put a bow on it. How would you suggest getting buy-in, culture, dedication, competitiveness, etc., from athletes at the high school varsity level from a team that lacks athlete leadership and seniority? I hear this is a good one. This is a good one, specifically in preparing a season with one upcoming senior. I love this. Deb, you take a swing, and then I have thoughts. And Katie, I'm going to give you some space. This is a great question, Haley.
Well, one of the things that I've seen is when you have one senior, there are pros and cons. The con is that that person may feel more responsibility on their shoulders. Not that leadership only comes from seniors, because I think that you should expand that into to other players, and not necessarily by class, but by who actually has that leadership potential. But we had one senior, Katie's junior year, and because she was the one senior, she took on the responsibility, and it was clear. It was clear who to follow. She did a good job. The juniors helped support her in that. So there was some good, because it was very clear who was leading the team. The next year we had 4 seniors, Katie's senior year. There's pros and cons to that. Having 4 leaders, you have different leadership styles. You might have different leadership philosophies. It may take them a bit to get on the same page. But on the other hand, there's more of them, so they can maybe conquer more, because they're going to have different relationships with different players on the team. Their outreach might be further. So every situation in leadership, I feel like, has pros and cons. And to the point of the first part of your question is, I think, trying to figure out through opportunities who steps forward in leadership organically, rather than saying it's just the senior or it's just the junior. We've had some of the best leadership in our program in the last 2 years, and we do not have captains. I made a shift away from captains, because in our program, we want everyone to be equal, and we don't want certain people to have more powers than others, because that's kind of what happens. It becomes power, and then difficulty comes from those powers. So for us, we don't have certain captains, and we let our leadership kind of organically step forward as the season is going forward. And it does. And my fear was that it wouldn't. But I think if you're doing all the other things in your program the way that you want to, the leadership will step forward.
Can I jump in? We worked a lot on this, because that was one of the transitions that needed to happen, as we were going through this. And I just remember early on when we were talking about various things. I mean, and there's some fear there, right? Because like I remember some reluctance to like, if I do this, if we change this leadership thing, there's going to be some blowback, right? Then you like, and I'm always like, I know I don't live in Disney World. You can't just like do it and be like, oh, they need to get over it. That's not how it works. But I remember early on in our work getting really specific about asking you what you wanted out of your leaders. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And it ended up at first it was like communication stuff, right? Remember? And then do you want to talk a little bit about that transition at all? I can if you want me to keep going, but I would love to hear, because what you just said was we teach on leadership and then let that leadership organically like evolve.
Yeah, because if you're just putting, like, let's just say you just want your seniors to be the leaders. Okay. And depending on if you're a new coach in a program, you've been with those kids all 4 years, like you're coming into it in a different framework. But what if all of your seniors aren't really good leaders? You know, like that can happen. What if you have someone who's not bought in and now they have this sort of quote unquote power position that's maybe not been earned, and it can do more damage to your team than help. So I think letting it happen organically is really great, because over the course of a season, players will follow who actually is leading. And I think, yeah.
That's good. No, that's good. Katie, I'd love to hear your perspective on this too. Like this is.
Yeah, I would just add to encourage, like coach said, encourage the entire team to be a leader in some way. Because like I mentioned earlier in the talk, like getting buy-in from the team is probably the hardest part, because you need to figure out like what the common denominator is. And at the high school level, I think it's also very different than the college level. I think that there's some differences. Um, I think that if you can find the people, like coach told me, get people like on the bus with you, in your circle with you. If you can find like someone that sorry, I'm not
You're
this is
good.
out as well as I thought. Um, find someone that will get others on their bus. Like that could end up being the leader for the team, but I think that's going to initiate the rest of the team buying in.
Yep.
Because I think it's hard to, in high school, I know that like I played some sports that I knew I wasn't going to take past high school. So I think getting the buy-in is a little bit different than when you're committing your entire college experience to a sport. If that makes sense.
Totally. But I think you said it there. Like, I think figuring out, number one, I think seeing leadership as influence. If I could define it in one word, leadership is influence. When you think about it like that, it's not a title to behold. And that's something that you and I talked about a lot. Like there's something, especially in a culture where we just have all these titles and awards and we have to get all these things on our resume. So often the role of captain or leader on a team, when it's like a formal thing, becomes this honor to be bestowed. And we know it's the opposite. It's a place of servitude. And you can't, like, if you don't have it, you don't have it. And so if you don't have leadership, I can make you a captain all day, but it's not going to go well because it's the lowest level of leadership. And so being really clear about that first question, like, okay, what do you want out of your leaders? What do you want out of your cap? What do you need them to do for you as a coach to be successful? And I think that as coaches, we don't often get real about asking and answering that question, and it muddies the water. And it's hard for them to organically rise when we don't even know what we want from them. And if it's just to be a glorified secretary, then say that. Like, don't say you're a captain, but you just need to communicate. I'm going to throw you a text and communicate to. That's not leadership. That's not leadership. Right. So what were you going to jump in, Deb?
I just wanted to say I have an example. I don't know if Lauren Ridgway is on this call, but she was our senior last year. And Lauren desperately wanted to be a captain of our team, and we went away from having captains. And I know that that was something really hard for her. And I kept, talking through that with her and saying, you can still lead without a title. And I think that sometimes when we build in titles, then we build in separation,
Yes.
especially amongst teams with leadership. And so oftentimes we think of, oh, the captains are here and the rest of the team's here, but you can't lead from a place of above talking down at people from below. And so that was hard for Lauren at first because she wanted to take charge. She wanted that opportunity. What was amazing, though, for me as Lauren's coach, when she became a senior, we got rid of leaders in our program. We didn't vote on captains any longer. Lauren became a phenomenal leader in a lot of ways. I mean, she was our only senior. She helped turn our culture because she wasn't doing it for the title or the position. She was just doing the work that was required. And because of that, her leadership grew so much in a way that I don't think it would have grown if she had the title necessarily. Because being one senior, she needed the help of our juniors and others on the team for our team to operate in the best way. And because she was sort of quote unquote on the same level as others, she was able to bring others into what we were trying to do in our program in such an easier way. And so I felt like Lauren became a great leader because she didn't have the title, because she was relatable to everyone else. And it wasn't about, a position, it was about where we want to go as a program. And so from my standpoint, I don't see ever looking back. We always talk about in our department, who are your captains? Who are this? And I'm always like, we don't have captains, and I'm perfectly fine with it because we're all invested at the same level. Our freshmen are super close to our seniors because there's no divides. There's no one that's above anyone else in our program. We all have the same space.
That's so cool. Katie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Not specifically, but
Okay,
I would
that's
agree.
good.
Like I'm much more close to the freshman as a senior than I was as a freshman with my seniors. So seeing that shift is cool.
That's so cool. All right. I'm gonna stop us here. I just thank you so much. I have a feeling, I don't know, we might make this a series. Like we might have to come back. This has been such a fun conversation, and there's so much that we could go into that we didn't even really touch on, honestly. So again, I just wanted to thank you and thank everybody who, took the time to join us. We'll make sure that you get the contact information for Deb. And, maybe Katie, if you're somebody who, what's your major again?
Biochem.
Biochem. If you are looking for a biochem, I don't know about you, but like, I know the workforce right now, I'm hiring her. I don't even know. Like I'm finding her, and we're like, yeah, you're a rock star. So thank you both so much. And thank you all for taking the time to be here.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Tree.